You see the colour of the sea in this island. It's that azure blue on a clear day. It just reflects, and then it's got all these little diamonds dancing on top of it. You just cannot resist it. I often just stop the car and just run into the ocean. You might close, and by the time you get back to the car, you're dry again. It's just irresistible. I love it. Okay.
She was a girl with a divided heart, like the light and the dark, a divided heart, between two continents and somewhere far home, but where it really lay was deep within her soul. But where it really lay was deep within her soul.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Nikki Pistorius Profiler on Record. By now you've watched episode 6 of the television series Catch Me a Killer, which is based on my book. And in this series we meet the Cape Town prostitute killer. Now Roy Hazelwood, the ex-FBI profiler, had taught me that when sex workers are the victims of a serial killer, we need to establish were they killed because they are easy prey or were they killed due to their profession. And in this case, the killer had it in for them because of their profession, because they were sex workers. So the suspect in this case, when we interrogated him, told us that he was accosted by his mother and he slept in his mother's bed until he was 16 years old. Now, there are long-term consequences and problems, psychological problems, that will arise if parents sleep with their children in the same bed after their babies. Children should sleep in their own beds. There once was a case of a mother who had 6-year-old twin daughters, and she couldn't understand why this one daughter of 6-year-old would still be wetting her bed and the other one doesn't. And it came out the reason was that she wet her bed because her father was raping her little sister in her bed, and the only way that she could keep her father out of her own bed was by wetting the bed. So that was quite serious. I do understand that there are dire circumstances that certain people live in where they are forced to share a bedroom or share even a one-room little house. And I can quite understand then there are people sleeping together and etc. But if it is possible and you have large enough accommodation, then parents should not sleep in their children's bed, nor should children sleep in their parents' bed. So even if your child gets up at night, coming into bed or whatever, then I know you're tired and I know you're sleepy, but you should get up and take the child back to its own bed. And I know this is difficult, but nobody said parenting is easy. I know it's very, very difficult. Now, I'm not talking about when children are having a nightmare and they run to their parents because of the nightmare, or they're scared of thunder or something, etc. And they climb into the bed. Yes, that's great. Love it. And cuddle the child. And then take the child back to its own bed. And then stay with him until he falls asleep or her. So if parents are still sleeping with their children regularly as a habit, then there is definitely a red flag. So a little bit of informative information again. We discussed last week that children are just children, and that is true. But we cannot have children overrule common sense. They are children. Children do not have the cognitive capacity to make executive decisions in their mind, in their lives. What I usually say is, if we think of the neurons in the brain, then if we are building a house, then the electrical wiring is not, it's there, but it won't work until it is connected. So the electrical wiring of the neurons is in the child's brain, but it needs to be connected to start working. And it will be connected when we start talking to them. The children And that they can't make those decisions because it's not connected yet. So children, if you keep on sleeping in the child's bed, the message that you are communicating to the child is you are not safe unless I am there. At some stage, we have to let them go. They have to venture out and explore and become curious about life, because that also connects the neurons for them to find out. Don't do anything for a child that child can do by himself. Let them learn, let them explore, let their brains develop. That's a very good word. We actually need them to go out and break a leg to become independent adults. So, if children are allowed to manipulate their parents most of the time, then there will be long-term social and mental health problems. Remember, children are pleasure-driven. Children need nutritious food for their brains to develop. They will prefer to eat sugar and candy most of the time. Children need education. They will prefer to play games on their iPods most of the time. No child will go to the dentist voluntarily. No child will accept a jab in the arm voluntarily or go to hospital. They cannot make executive decisions about their mental and physical well-being. As responsible adults, we need to do that for them, whether they like it or not. And we cannot always bribe them by, if you do what I want you to do, then I will reward you with sweet, which is sugar. Not very good for their brains. So, talk to them. Explain to them why. I remember there was this one little cartoon about the child that had put a metal spoon into a microwave, and the thing exploded. And the child looked at the parent and said, "But you never told me not." So how would they know if you don't tell them? And the answer is not because I say so. Explain to them so that they start learning the long-term consequences. And I know also there are good parents who read books to their children at night and they fall asleep, etc. And that's quite wonderful. And then they get up and they go to bed. So that's all good. I know having children and raising them is the toughest job on earth. So in this series, we will see it starts of this little boy that is being accosted by his mother. So he told us that he slept in her bed until he was 16. He did not say whether they had sex or not. That we don't know. Now, some mothers keep their young boys as little children, as little boys for a very, very long time. They might even already be teenagers and they still have these diminutive little nicknames for them. Little Nicky, little Nicky is already 16 years old. If the mother persists in doing that, and some mothers resent their young men having girlfriends because he must be mommy's boy and she needs to be the only woman in his life. So as they grow up, these mommy's boys, they will not be capable of having a mature relationship with a mature adult woman. And in effect, the mother is psychologically castrating the boy. And he might become impotent. And Freud spoke about this castration anxiety that the boys can develop. And many people might say that Freud is old-fashioned or etc., or they don't believe in his theory of castration anxiety. So, a little bit of informative focus here. In the ancient Chinese literature, during the Qing dynasty, there was a book called The New Collection of Remedies. And the New Collection of Remedies was written 211 to 207 BC. And in that, I discussed the phenomenon of kuros. It was called kuros. And kuros referred to a delusional disorder in where the male is convinced that his penis is shrinking or that it's retracting back into the body. And it's based on a Malayo-Indonesian word which refers to a turtle, because the turtle can retract. So Freud was not that far off. Castration anxiety has been with us 200 years before Christ and even before that. It is always there. So the problem with impotent killers is there is no DNA on the crime scene. The problem as well when the victims are sex workers is there is too much DNA because they have multiple people, customers sleeping with them before we find the bodies. So in this episode, what was very, very characteristic of it is how this killer was staging every one of his crime scenes. So he thought if he changed every crime scene, we wouldn't be able to link them together as a series. But the fact that every crime scene was staged actually became his signature, and that linked them together to form the series. So staging is when the killer tries to change something on the crime scene after the fact, or he changes an aspect of his behavior to deliberately throw off the investigation. So it would be an example of a blanket thrown over the victim, but the blanket has no blood on it, although the victim was brutally assaulted. Clearly it was thrown afterwards. Or he posed the body in some very weird position. Now in this case, one of the victims was turned upside down and her head was pushed into an ant-heap with her legs sticking out, which is clearly not natural. Nobody's going to commit suicide by putting their head into an ant-heap with their feet sticking out. But that was the bizarreness that we had in this case of him trying to change the crime scenes. So also, often when a killer tries to change the crime scene, he is in a hurry. And they make mistakes. So killers might have some time to spend on the crime scene, but they do not have all the time to spend on the crime scenes. And usually they just want to get away from them and cover their tracks. So the detectives and the forensic experts and the profiler have more than enough. We can spend days on a crime scene to analyze and reconstruct every little detail of that crime scene to figure out what happened there. Okay. So in Cape Town, we actually spend hours and hours in the pouring rain reconstructing every element of this killer's crime scenes. And we did figure him out. But we lacked evidence. So what we did in this case as well is we started interviewing the sex workers of Cape Town. There was a particular strip along Voortrekker Road that he focused on. So we started working with these girls on the streets at night. And this was a very interesting experience working with them. And they identified a certain person to us. Now, what we'd seen previously on one of these crime scenes was a bottle was inserted into the genitals of one of the victims, which clearly posed impotence and castration anxiety. So when we started discussing this with them, then some of them came forward and they told us that they know about a client who was impotent and who had made certain references to a bottle, etc. And they also identified the vehicle that he was driving. Now, in the series, he's called William Tritter, and I'll explain to you why just a little bit later. So a very frustrating element of this case that is very well depicted in the crimes in this television series is the fact that he played cat and mouse with us all the time. Now, in the beginning, the prostitutes or the sex workers, they would work in pairs. So one would write down the vehicle registration number that the other one went with, and then that's how they kept track. And then they gave us all these reports. So we had to work through all those reports, and it was quite interesting that some prominent businessmen, vehicle numbers came up. We destroyed that eventually, but that was quite interesting. So they worked with us. But the thing is, this killer, although by then we knew who he was, we had identified him, and now we were observing him, but he played the cat and mouse. And the thing is, in reality, the police, it's not like in a TV series where they have the world's resources at their fingertips. They don't. They lack resources, and they don't have the manpower to keep somebody under surveillance 24 hours a day. So this man would often slip the loop, which is very, very unfortunate. Okay, so once we found forensic inconsistencies on a crime scene, then that indicates staging to us. So this killer, for instance, he would wrap clothing around the victim's neck, hoping we would think that she was strangled with that. Well, when that was removed, then the pathologist would tell us, no, but she was strangled with a ligature of very thin string. So there is inconsistencies. So when killers adapt or change their modus operandi or their victims, this can happen, but they still leave the signature. So the difference between modus operandi and signature is modus operandi is learned behavior. It can progress. For instance, Moses Itoli in the beginning tied up his victims in a certain way, and then he progressed to more sophisticated bondage. That is modus operandi progressing. Jack the Ripper, as I said before, let's look at the victim. He was busy with one victim, but he was disturbed. So he learned from that, and the next one he took her in a room. You see how they learn and they adapt through the crimes. Sifu Twala was plaiting these harnesses that he put around the women's necks, the women's faces. So that is elements of fantasy that comes into it. So the moment that we have the repetitive personation, then that becomes the signature of the serial killer. So when there is ritualism or there is symbolism or compulsion on the crime scene that we found, then that is his signature. And that is him acting out his fantasy. And no two people on earth have the same fantasies. So once we get to the kernel of this fantasy, then we know. So in this case, we had this, and now we're following up on this specific Warren Burns. And in this episode, people would say that, he complained. His ex-wife told us that he often said he had blackouts. And he was referred to some clinic. So we went to the clinic. Now, no medical officer is obliged to give information to the police about any client, unless a judge orders it. And then they can do it under protest, but they never do it. So we saw the doctor. We already had the name. We didn't want him to reveal the name. I didn't really want to know much that is in the file. I just needed him to confirm one thing for me. And that was the suspect really suffering from amnesia and blackouts? And the answer was no. It was malingering. So there was no formal diagnosis. So we know he's pretending. So in one of the previous episodes as well, we looked at somebody that is feigning mental illness. So Section 77 and Section 79 of the Criminal Procedures Act of 1977 South Africa states, the accused may be found mentally ill or not mentally ill, fit to stand trial or not fit to stand trial, to have the capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of the act in question and to act accordingly or not, and to be found mentally ill or not to be mentally ill at the time of the crime. So what this means is that we're looking at two time periods. The first is the accused mentally fit to stand trial? Does he have the capacity to understand what is happening in the trial? The other time period is at the time of committing the murder or the crime. Did he then have the mental capacity to know what he was doing, if that was right or not? So at this stage, if we look at this killer's modus operandi, it was very, very well planned. For instance, that's when we reconstructed everything. We looked at the dates and the times that had happened, etc. So we found he would select a rainy afternoon, late rainy afternoon, and then he would pick up one of these street sex workers that just does business on the street. she would climb into his vehicle. It's raining. And then he would drive to the parking area of a shopping centre. Now, it's raining. People are in a hurry to get in and out and back to their cars. They're not looking what's happening in a specific car. And the windows are steamed up. So once she's sitting there, remember, she wants to go quickly, get the job done and go back to make more money. So once she's in the car in this rainy atmosphere with the windows steamed up, he would then hit her with a fist in the face. And she would then slump down. And then he would already there strangle her. And then he would drive out to the farm areas, which was quite dark. Now, if you drive there in the dark of night, you would never know that there was a gate or something on the side to be able to drive in, unless you recce'd that before. So then he would drive in the rain, and then he would pose them in these funny poses, etc., and drive away, and he knew the rain was going to wash away the evidence and the typewriters. So that was premeditated and very well. So the fact that he started acting crazy or trying to say that he had amnesia is contradictory to the well-planned of the crime. So that was clearly of a very sane mind. Now, we also have what we call pathological and non-pathological incapacity. In the case of pathological incapacity, the defense attorney of the accused would bear the onus of proving that at the time of the commission of the crime, the accused lacked the criminal capacity on a balance of probabilities and that the accused was clearly mentally ill. However, in the case of non-pathological incapacity, the accused will allege that at the time of the commission of the crime, he lacked the criminal capacity that was not due to a pathological disease. For example, he was under such emotional stress that they could not understand or appreciate the wrongfulness of the act, although they did not suffer from a mental illness. For instance, a father killing the rapist of his child. There's enough emotional stress there, but he's not suffering from a mental illness. So if this defense is used, then the state bears the onus of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused had the capacity at the time of the crime to understand what he was doing. However, the accused must lay a foundation for his defense, which is sufficient to create reasonable doubt. The courts do not take this defense lightly, and they take great care to scrutinize the evidence. For example, the court will take into consideration the duration of the emotional stress building up to the act. Now, in our next series of Profile on Record, when we have a look at female criminals, I will discuss a case of a woman that I testified for that had non-pathological incapacity because of the stress that she was under and how she was manipulated to commit a crime. What we also need is automatism. Automatism is another defense, and it deals with involuntariness. Involuntariness refers to the accused's conduct at the time of the commission of the crime, and the accused is said to have acted involuntarily and was not subject to his conscious will. Now, an example of that would be a person, say, who suffers of epilepsy, and the person is standing in a car in a robot, in a traffic light, and gets a fit of epilepsy, and in that fit puts his foot on the pedal and runs over a person. So that would be it's involuntary conduct. The question would then be, should he be driving with epilepsy? So these are some of the defenses that can be used. And I think this killer in this case, as he was walking around town dressed up like an American native Indian, etc., pretending to be crazy, and that's what he did. So I must also take my hat off to the criminal lawyers that defend criminals. I know often people cannot understand how could they defend criminals. Justice says every person is entitled to a fair trial. And that is where our criminal lawyers come in. And they do a very good job. Some of them, I must admit, have huge egos. In any case, they are there in the name of justice to see that a person can get a fair trial. Imagine somebody's innocent. If you are innocent, wouldn't you want a very good criminal lawyer to defend you? Right, so let's take into consideration that they are doing their job as well. And then, of course, there are the state prosecutors on the other side. And the state prosecutors, like the police, have very limited resources, and they work for mean salaries as well. And they often enter the lion's den against these very well qualified criminal lawyers for the defense. So let's raise our glasses to the men and women in their black togas, and not forgetting the judges in their red togas. These are all good men and good women working very hard in the name of justice. To the lawyers. So, although this killer in this episode, well, in reality, was not very good at acting crazy, I must compliment the actor, Corin Knapp, who was very good at acting the role of this criminal. And also, I'd like to compliment Charlene Leroux, who played the role of Eva, the proverbial sex worker with a golden heart. I really liked working with her. And I did have a great time with her. She's a very good cook, and she was very nurturing and very warm, and she contained my guilt feelings, and had a great time with her. So at this stage as well, I must say that the post-traumatic stress dragon was raging in me, but not to the extent where the killer's or a killer's face would flash before me, as it is in this episode depicted when Mickey was in an intimate moment with her boyfriend. I must admit, I am really disappointed in this particular scene, and I do think that the director could have chosen some other way, a better way to depict post-traumatic stress. And unfortunately, when somebody has never experienced post-traumatic stress, they superimpose their idea of what it is onto a character, as they did in this particular scene. So quite frankly, it is inaccurate, it's inappropriate, and I think it's just a little bit of a cheap shot at sensationalism. It doesn't work for me. But, on the other hand, I would like to compliment, again, Dino Benedetti, our creative director and the photographer with his wonderful magic camera, as he depicted the seedy nightlife of Cape Town and the extras that worked as the sex workers strutting their stuffs on the street. So that impressed me very, very much. We really had a lot of cooperation between the sex workers, much more than with the women that we had in the Atteridgeville and the Cleveland cases. And I think it might be because sex workers are very aware of the danger. They know that they can be raped or killed. While normal working women might think it will never happen to them. So speaking about a night out on the town, I have never been an extroverted party animal. I'm an introvert. But by now, my post-traumatic stress symptoms was to that extent that I completely avoided social gatherings. And I withdraw into myself. So occasionally I might attend a birthday celebration at my sister's house for one of our family members. And she had a huge fire pit. And I would sit at that fire pit and just watch the fire. I didn't really want to speak to them because I didn't want to contaminate them with whatever horror was happening in my mind. And now, in retrospect, I know that it's wrong to withdraw from the people that love you when you have PTSD. It's very wrong. So we see in this episode as well that Mickey is asked by Suzanne, her sister, are you okay? And Mickey says, I'm fine. And she's clear that she wasn't fine. And Mickey tries to talk to Mark, but he doesn't get it. He doesn't really understand it. So all that has changed for me in the 30 years since. I'm still an introvert, and I enjoy my solitary walks on the beach. But now I have a healthy social life. I live in a wonderful, diverse community where locals and expats from different nations support, banter, tease, bicker and exchange cultures. But mostly, we laugh together. Laughter, by the way, increases the heart rate and the blood pressure, and it improves the cognitive functioning. So laughter decreases cortisol, your stress hormone. It reduces anxiety, depression, and it boosts your self-esteem, your energy, and hope. And it gives you a sense of empowerment. So even when there is rugby, and congratulations to the Springboks for winning the World Cup, there is a good humoured bantering among everybody there. I meet people from all strata of life, whom I suppose I would never have met if I stayed in my home country. And the experience is exhilarating to me, and I learn from it. I share my days and my nights with many expat South Africans, but also with French, British, Slovenians, Germans, Italians, Turks, Russians and Ukrainians, and of course these wonderful people of this island. My life now is enriched. Good people can stand together. Returning to the series, what happened to this particular suspect? He was never brought to trial because we didn't have enough evidence. And sex workers and prostitutes in Cape Town are still being killed. So please join me next week in episode 7 of Nikki Pistorius' Profiler on Record, after you've watched episode 7 of the television series Catching a Killer. And then we will dive deep into the abyss to meet South Africa's Canada, who also killed his own daughter. So I hope you find this informative and educational, inspirational, and I am giving you a really authentic account of my life and what it is like working with the minds of serial killers without sensationalism. If you like what we are doing, you can give us a thumbs up, share it, subscribe, and I will see you next week.
She was a girl with a divided heart, like the light and the dark, the divided heart. Between two continents and somewhere far home, but where it really lay was deep within her soul. But where